What is the sound of an empire collapsing? It is not the thunder of artillery or the shriek of a dive bomber. It is not the roar of a victory speech or the cry of a vanquished soldier. The true sound of an empire's end is silence. Sputtering cough of a 70-ton engine starved of life, a metallic gasp in the frozen air, followed by a profound and final quiet. It is the silence of powerlessness, the silence of a machine that can no longer move. This is a story about that silence and the deafening truth it revealed in the winter of 1944. In the biting cold of the Ardennes forest, a legend was being forged in steel and desperation. The man at its heart was Colonel Klaus Richter, a commander whose name was spoken with a mixture of fear and reverence. His armored spearhead, Kampfruppstahl, was the very tip of Germany's last great gamble in the West. His keen Tiger tanks were mechanical beasts, superior in armor and firepower to anything the Allies could field. Richter himself was a master of the blitzkrieg, a tactician of ferocious genius. He believed, as did all his men, in the superiority of the German soldier, in their fighting spirit, and in the righteousness of their cause. But a ghost haunted his every decision, a specter that lurked not on the battlefield, but in the fuel gauge of every tank, every truck, every armored car. Fuel. It was the army's blood, and Germany was bleeding out. By 1944, Allied bombers had systematically shattered the synthetic fuel plants that the war machine depended on. For every 100 barrels of oil the Americans produced, Germany now produced less than 2. Every German general knew this, but they fought on, driven by a doctrine that placed tactical brilliance and fighting will above all else. They believed they could outfight their enemy, that their spirit could overcome the enemy's material advantage. Richter's offensive was a testament to this belief. His orders were to capture Allied fuel depots, not to defeat armies, but to capture their fuel. The entire operation was a desperate raid, predicated on the hope of feeding their starving machines with the enemy's own lifeblood. The first few days were a blur of chaotic success. Richter's panzers smashed through the unprepared American lines, their powerful cannons sweeping aside resistance. But the ghost was always with them. For every tank lost to enemy fire, 2 more were simply abandoned, their engines silent. Their crews joining the infantry with nothing but their rifles and their rage. Every command Richter gave was a grim calculation of distance versus consumption. He could advance 10 kilometers, or he could maneuver to destroy an enemy column, but he could not do both. The war was no longer about maps and tactics. It was about leaders and gallants. His mighty Tigers, the pride of the Reich, were becoming nothing more than immobile steel coffins, waiting for a fuel transfusion that would never come. Then, on the verge of total failure, as his last reserves were dwindling to fumes, the miracle happened. His scouts reported back, their voices trembling with disbelief. Just ahead, near a small Belgian town by the Amblève River, was a massive American fuel depot. It was barely defended, abandoned in their hasty retreat. Richter's men advanced and found a sight that defied comprehension. It was not a depot. It was a city of fuel. Tens of thousands of 5-gallon jerrycans stacked in pyramids that blotted out the winter sky. Hundreds of fuel tankers parked in neat rows, barrels upon barrels. More fuel than Richter had seen in the entire campaign. More than enough to get his panzers all the way to Antwerp to win the battle, perhaps even the war. A wave of euphoria swept through the exhausted troops. God was with them. This was their reward for their sacrifice and bravery. But as Colonel Richter stood amidst this ocean of gasoline, the elation curdled into a cold, creeping dread. He watched his men laughing and cheering as they refueled their thirsty machines. He, however, saw something else. He called his senior officers together, men who had fought from Poland to Stalingrad. He gestured to the endless stacks of cans. "Look at this," he said, his voice low and devoid of triumph. "Look at it all." His officers beamed. "It's a miracle Colonel. Providence has delivered us. Richter shook his head slowly. This is not a miracle, he whispered, the words hanging like ice crystals in the air. This is a message. He picked up a full American jerrycan, its weight a testament to its contents. The Americans did not lose this depot in a desperate fight. They simply left it. For them to abandon a treasure like this, a treasure that would mean the salvation of our entire army, what does it tell us? The officers stared at him, their smiles fading. The horrifying truth began to dawn on them. It tells us, Richter continued, his voice heavy with revelation, that this amount of fuel means nothing to them. This is not a treasure. This is their surplus. This is what they can afford to throw away. We have been fighting a soldier, but the true enemy is a factory. We have been fighting a battalion, but the true enemy is a supply chain. In that moment, the war was lost. Not in a clash of tanks, but in a silent understanding of an economic truth. The German propaganda had spoken of American weakness, of a decadent and soft society. But here was the proof of their real power. A power so vast, so carelessly immense, that they could misplace a king's ransom in fuel and simply keep fighting. The scale of this power was beyond anything the German High Command had ever conceived. While German industry was a smoldering ruin, the Americans had built a logistical system that was a wonder of the modern world. They had laid a pipeline under the English Channel, codenamed Pluto, pumping millions of gallons directly to the front. Their legendary Red Ball Express, a continuous convoy of trucks, driven day and night, formed an artery of steel and rubber that supplied the armies with everything they needed and more. While German soldiers were freezing, issued a single blanket and told to scavenge for food. American GIs complained about the taste of their hot meals and used precious gasoline in their tent stoves for a little extra warmth. This casual abundance was a more potent psychological weapon than any leaflet drop. And then came the ultimate, soul-crushing confirmation of Richter's fears. As other parts of the front collapsed, the Americans began a policy of deliberate destruction. Near the town of Stablot, engineers poured 2 million gallons of high-octane gasoline into the sewers and set it ablaze to prevent its capture. Spot in the first week of the battle alone, the U.S. Army intentionally destroyed over 8 million gallons of fuel. To the Germans, who measured fuel in droplets, this was an act of cosmic insanity. It was like watching a starving man set fire to a banquet. It was the act of a god, not a mortal enemy. It broke their morale in a way no battle ever could. The will to fight, the belief in victory evaporated in the face of such incomprehensible, overwhelming material supremacy. The rest of Richter's offensive was a death rattle. His tanks, some newly refueled, pushed on a few more kilometers before inevitably running dry again. The final image of the Battle of the Bulge was not one of epic tank duels, but of long, silent columns of the most advanced fighting vehicles in the world, abandoned perfectly intact on the side of a snowy road. Their crews were gone, forced to walk back to their own lines, leaving behind monuments to a fatal miscalculation. The war had evolved beyond the genius of men like Richter. It had become a war of production, a brutal, unforgiving audit of national capacity. Bravery was still valuable, tactics still mattered, but they were footnotes in a story whose plot was written by factory output and logistical efficiency. Years later, historians would uncover a detail that served as the final, bitter epitaph to Camp Frobstahl's charge. They found the American quartermaster logs for that sector of the front. The amount of fuel that Colonel Richter needed to seize the port of Antwerp, the amount that would have crowned his desperate gamble with victory, was noted. An American officer, needing to supply a counterattack in the area, had put in a request for that exact amount of gasoline. The request was approved in hours. And how was this vast, weltering quantity of fuel classified in the American records? It was not drawn from strategic reserves. It was not diverted from other fronts. It was logged simply and unceremoniously as a minor dispatch from local stocks. What would have been the salvation of an army, the last hope of a nation, was a rounding error for their enemy. The silence of Richter's tanks in the snow was not the sound of a battle lost. It was the sound of a new truth dawning upon the world, that in the modern age, the mightiest weapon of all is not the sword in a soldier's hand, but the unyielding, unstoppable engine of industry and supply that puts it there. That is the foundation of true strength, the quiet power that decides the fate of nations long before the first shot is ever fired.